This program was first broadcast on Canterbury's access media station, Plains FM, and was made with the assistance of New Zealand On Air.
Welcome to Breaking Ground, a podcast about earth-moving machinery, businesses and characters in the industry. All your hosts work for Terra, New Zealand's Caterpillar machinery dealer. I'm Richard Clark.
And I'm Marty Turek. Today we're talking to Brad Olsen, Principal Economist and Director at Infometrics. Brad is one of New Zealand's leading economic commentators, and we thought it was a great opportunity to get his perspective on the key industries that we work with every day within New Zealand. Welcome, Brad. It's nice to have you in the studio today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Brad, over the last couple of years, you've been a bit of a go-to guy on the economy. We regularly see you in the media, but how would you describe in simple terms what you do?
Well, trying to figure out where things are going next. A fair bit of that crystal ball gazing, but really trying to look at all the various trends and understand what is going to be coming forward, where are there opportunities, but also challenges for businesses so that they're aware of what's coming through before it hits them. And I guess certainly at the moment, it's not just one or two things. It's just about the entire economic playing field is moving day by day, hour by hour. So trying to keep an idea of what all of that is so that people out there don't have to do it themselves, communicating that out, just highlighting those opportunities a lot of the time.
Well, that's great.
So, obviously with sort of times in that, there's plenty of commentary around recent economic forecasts about sort of headwinds and key industries that we look at as we're going in towards sort of 2023. But there's also positive news out there as well. So where do you think New Zealand's going, and as we sort of move through the remainder of this year and into 2023?
Look, I think realistically things are going to be a bit more challenging over the next few years, but that's relative to two very, very strong years coming out of a lot of stimulus from the COVID-19 pandemic. At the same time, things are going to be still better than they were pre-pandemic. There's a lot of momentum that we've built up, and realistically New Zealand's economy is still one of the best performing in the world. We haven't had that same level of disruption you've seen globally. We haven't seen nearly as many deaths, so that momentum's there. I think it is going to be harder and more expensive to grow this year, but going forward there's still a lot of opportunity, and the fact that there is such momentum, people have got jobs, all of the fundamentals are sitting in the right place. It's just that I don't think we're going to be sort of rolling quite as easily as we have over the last two.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of hear a lot about the construction industry at the moment, and it's got a few issues with supply chains, interest rates up, house prices down nationwide, and that's having a flow-on effect, with machinery being supplied into the market for contractors. What are you seeing there, and I suppose what are you projecting for 2023?
Look, I think with the construction sector, it's the sort of thing, there's still a very, very healthy pipeline. When we talk to a lot of people out there, the first thing they say is, I'm pretty confident for the next 12 months. And then things are always a bit more variable. Now, to be fair, everyone in the construction sector's always sort of said it's a bit more variable at some point in the future. But I haven't ever heard them say that 12 months they've got so much work on. Normally it's sort of 3 to 6. Part of that's delays and disruptions and pricing and all that sort of thing. But realistically, we know there's just so much going on. Residential activity over 50,000 consents over the last year. The likes of non-residential, there's a huge amount still going on. What's being built is shifting. It's no longer quite the same as it was pre-pandemic. And then on the sort of civil and infrastructure side, there's still a huge amount going on. Government wanting to get going with stuff, local government. So a lot of energy. I think there's just still a fair bit of nervousness creeping in, and people have got to keep their wits about them. We know that businesses in the construction sector now reporting, of course, those delays and the material challenges and labour market issues, but also probably worryingly to us is that there are more businesses that are a bit more fragile. They're not able to keep that cash flow going. We're seeing that the number of overdue debts are increasing a touch, and I think it's just realistic again that we're going through quite a huge period of disruption, but a lot of businesses still on a solid footing, able to keep going, and it's just that sheer amount of work going on at the moment and into the future means that we're still relatively upbeat, all things considered.
Yeah, it certainly still seems really busy out there when we're talking to customers out there, that's for sure.
Yeah, very much so. And I suppose that's sort of, you touched on with the housing industry and that sort of thing. So look, we're seeing new builds and new consents and stuff coming through versus sort of existing houses for sale in the residential market. So what's your sort of feeling on how that sort of can trend from here?
Yeah, I mean, obviously quite interrelated. We know that when it comes to the housing market, let's start there for a second, those very quickly increasing interest rates are starting to hit home in the existing market. Number of sales are down quite sharply. The number of houses that are available for sale has increased because no one could get those deals going. But as well as that, and probably the big kicker for us is that is starting to flow through into residential work. You know, there's an expectation of, maybe I can't get this project across the line. House prices now have been sliding for 5 odd months in total. At the same time, building costs have gone up 18%. Now, if you're a business who's trying to sell something that's costing you 18% more to produce, but the price that you're expecting to get has now gone down, that can get uncomfortable for some, and then, cash flow issues and what have you. But, and this is an important but, we know that the government's also made it quite a bit harder now to invest in an existing home. It's not nearly as worthwhile. Bright line tests, the likes of the loss of interest deductibility. So if you're looking now as an investor, I think a lot of people we talk to quite a lot, are saying, actually, this new build stuff is looking all right. We've got to try and navigate the cost pressures and similar, but this is looking a lot more lucrative. So I think you are, what we were expecting is that the housing market does have a bit of a turn down. It just can't keep going at what were just silly prices over the last year. But I think going forward as well, we are expecting that consent numbers pull back a touch over the next year or so. Again, off a base of 50,000, it's still going to be well above sort of 35,000 over the next few years, but maybe a little bit more upside than we're allowing for, just given how much sort of possible momentum there is given those government shifts. So still upbeat, just coming off that very, very high peak.
Yeah, and do you sort of see that equilibrium between new builds and, I suppose, existing houses sort of maybe meeting a bit closer in the middle?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, starting to advantage a lot more those new builds in a sense. And we know there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, a huge amount of activity that's already going on. So there's a careful balance in how much can New Zealand intend to build versus how much can we actually physically achieve in such short order. But I think at the moment, no one's all that keen on the existing builds as much as they were. With our expectations were previously that the number of existing houses sold would come back to 2019 levels. Now we're expecting it to pull back even harder, just given those sort of disruptions. So I do think you start to see new builds edging things out. It's just, can we build them? Have we got the people and the labour and the money and the materials? Because all of that is hurting quite hard.
Yeah, so obviously some opportunities there, though.
Oh, huge opportunity. And I think for a lot of people, very much looking at them and going, okay, I know I can still make this work. It's harder to make money into the future. I think that's pretty clear. But again, that's coming off the easiest time to make money ever. It's still a pretty good place. People are still looking for those options. And I think especially with those interest rates going higher, people are going to be looking in different places. So again, it's just sort of moving those chess pieces around a bit more.
And what about the impact of changes to the unitary plans for major cities, I suppose allowing high density housing? Do you think that'll prolong the growth from a housing consent perspective?
Yeah, I do. I mean, you've got a huge amount there. You've got all of the changes to the unitary plans. You've got changes to local councils going through a lot of their district plans as well. The government coming forward with some pretty forthright views that actually there's got to be a really good excuse not to build in denser places and at denser levels. So that's going to be quite a shift forward. I think what it also does, though, is really starts to continue that push of we need to continue to upgrade our infrastructure. So it's not just sort of laying brand new pipes into a whole new development. Sometimes it's going to be retrofitting our current existing stuff, looking at how we do that without disrupting cities and similar as much, but also just the sheer growth that's coming through in sort of more of the provincial centres. We know there's a huge amount, in Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch and that, but we know that some of those other sort of more provincial areas, Whangarei is a good example, they're having a lot of work going on, a lot of people that want to move there. So you're still seeing a lot of that activity. What we're very much seeing, particularly in the infrastructure space, is that there is a lot of work to go on with. So, and I think that's the thing. When we talk about the possible disruptions and the challenges, it's sort of at the margins. There's just such a huge bulk of work already going on that, anything from our last forecast might look a little bit weaker. But if you look at it over time, it's still a huge mountain of work that's coming forward.
Yeah, it's sort of good to see with those infrastructures. You sort of touched on Whangarei. I was living in Tauranga for a while there, and you sort of see it trying to catch up and that sort of thing. So that'll still keep going on in the background as well.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the latest numbers we've pulled together suggest $172 billion over the next 10 years worth of infrastructure sort of capital investment. It's just a huge amount. And the difficulty really, as it's been over the last few years, is actually how do we resource such huge amounts of growth? I mean, we know we've got a lot of work on, but trying to find the materials and the people, from your guys' point of view, right, finding the equipment, it's not easy to just all of a sudden magic up another piece of, big yellow machinery. That means it's a good problem to have, but it's still a challenge.
Very much so. So there appears to be a bit of disparity between sort of customer confidence surveys and like behaviour currently. So the most obvious example is that sort of new car sales are down 0.7% last month, but consumer confidence is negative. If this was the reality, aren't new car purchases one of the immediate indicators that customers were sort of lacking confidence in major purchases?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's a trend that we're seeing reflected in just general card spending right at the moment. Those numbers are still upbeat. Relative to 2019 levels, New Zealanders spent around about 4% more in May 2022 than they did pre-pandemic. Now, there's some inflation in there, but the fact that they're still spending more is, it comes at a time when, according to the ANZ Consumer Confidence Survey, consumers are thinking it's the worst time ever, since the survey started in 2004. It's worse than the GFC. It's worse than the start of COVID-19 when we thought that Great Depression 2.0 was upon us. So I think what you're starting to see there is two things. One, there's enough confidence that things are all right at the moment, but there's a feeling that there is a bit of a cliff possibly coming. And I think for a lot of consumers, that change in confidence is just because, look, you've gone from super easy money to just not quite as easy. It's not hugely expensive, but it's just nowhere near, it used to be 2.2% you could get a mortgage for. Now it's, edging 6. So I think you're seeing that shift, and I think the difference between why people are saying that it's going to look bad but aren't currently seeing it and spending like it are because their interest rates haven't actually changed. They know they're going to change when they next refix, and that's making them downbeat, but for the moment they're like, no, I'll keep going for the moment.
Yeah, that 5-year rate at 2.99, if you, 6 to 9, 12 months ago would have been pretty good to lock in back then, wouldn't it? So,
look, I know some people that did it, and I think they are the smartest people I've ever met. The fact that people are now like, should I lock in for a longer term? It's like, maybe if you want, a surety of what you're going to be paying, but realistically, the good time to do it was before everyone was asking that question.
Yeah, they've sort of missed the boat there, haven't they? I suppose another indicator is the ANZ trucker meter, which we sort of look at from time to time, is a pretty consistent indicator of GDP growth. And in April and May, it has risen. So I suppose touching on what you talked about before suggests that second quarter GDP will show real growth. Is this an indicator of growth again, showing the New Zealand economy is sort of in line for a bounce back into stable growth?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think we've got to be realistic. The start of 2022 wasn't fantastic. I mean, Omicron really did wipe some stuff out. Obviously, back in red meant that we weren't going out and about as much, from a consumer point of view, we weren't driving around. But also, even from a business point of view, by our estimates, 300,000 New Zealanders were out of work, at any one time at the peak. They had COVID, they had to be household contacts, they just couldn't get out. And so that was hugely, hugely disruptive. What we are, I think, starting to see, particularly with the move to orange in April, there is this expectation that things are getting better. People are just judging their risks a bit more, getting out and about. So you are seeing a bounce, and I think the other indicators we're looking at, the likes of spending as well, suggesting that the amount of freight moving around the country has been edging up, a little bit of catch-up that we're sort of playing after a weaker start to the year. So I do think we're rebuilding that momentum. I guess the other big question is how much of it is sort of going to continue and how much of it is just catch-up from the first quarter. Talking to people, there seems to be a feeling that momentum is actually holding steady, so it hasn't just been sort of a last gasp. The question then comes, well, okay, how long does it stick around for? And I think that momentum is all right. It'll pull back a touch when those interest rates start to bite. People are going to have to cut something out of their budget. But again, we're for a first home buyer, that's going to be really hard because that's all they've ever known is super low rates. But you take someone who had a mortgage just before COVID, coming through into COVID, they've had a lot more spare cash, but going out of it now, they're just going back to what they had before. So as long as they can basically take the old budget out from 2019 and whack it back in, they should be able to keep going all right, and that's what's giving us confidence about the future.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting sort of time over the next sort of couple of years, like you say, when we see those interest rates come in and bite and that sort of thing. So we take it away from sort of the household type of things and just sort of touch back towards industry and infrastructure and that sort of thing. So what are some of the big infrastructure projects on a more of a national level that are coming through that you sort of know of and that are on the horizon and that sort of thing?
I think the biggest one and the biggest sort of unknown in a sense, and it's no one big project, but it's just all of the water stuff that's coming forward. Obviously, government's talking a lot about Three Waters reform. I mean, a lot of that at the moment is a political conversation and similar. Most people are just interested in, hey, when can I not have the pipes break around me? So we know there's a huge amount of work going on there, but finding the right people and resources is going to be huge. Of course, transmission gully's done now, which is exciting, but the likes of the Otaki work continues. That's still going to be, I think, rolling forward and provide some huge development there. And then, look, I'm a Northlander by birth, so it's exciting to see the work going up above Puhoi and similar. So I think some of those sort of older legacy projects that are still working their way forward, I mean, they're very well under construction. The question then becomes, the likes of New Zealand upgrade program and similar coming forward is big. But as well as that, I think a lot around the likes of some of the energy projects that are hopefully going to spring up. You've seen a lot, of course, around the likes of wind farms that are being announced, but you're seeing, I mean, we've had a look recently, the number of solar farms and similar and all of the related infrastructure that they need are coming forward. That's going to be exciting. I think we're all just sort of waiting for the confirmed details of that before we really firmly sort of put the stick in the sand. Big unknown question in terms of one big project that I'm always fascinated with, and this is just Auckland, right? The likes of light rail, I mean, $14.6 billion, huge amount of money, just difficult to understand how on earth that actually, when it gets going, how it gets resourced, and then into the future, sort of the Manukau crossing idea. There's a lot that needs to be done there in terms of across the harbour, looking at Manukau itself, looking at, second harbour crossing in general in Auckland. A lot of ideas, a lot of big, tickets being talked around, but, where do you find the money, the people and the resources? That's a big open question.
Yeah, and I suppose there's been questions around that for many years, and hopefully there's some resolution on that, in the next 2 or 3, hopefully.
Yeah.
So I suppose going a bit wider afield, the Chinese economy, it's on a lot of people's minds from an economic perspective. What's your view on China and their economy?
Yeah, look, I think we've got to be pretty realistic. We're a bit worried, and I think that's just because we've been expecting that momentum was going to help drive the world economy going further. The fact that they're still focused on zero COVID has been a real disruption, at least in 2022, to rebuilding that momentum. You've seen the wait times for shipping delays come through quite a lot. You've seen just disruption in manufacturing has started to hit. What we were, I guess, questioning at the early stages of this year was the Chinese economy just sort of going to hibernate again for a period. What's worried us a little bit is that demand's been a bit soft. Now, again, we're not cratering. This is not, absolute red alarm bells, but just a bit of cautiousness there. We've seen dairy prices pull back a bit, albeit from very, very high levels. So just a feeling there's a little bit more moderation there. The wider question, I think, for the Chinese economy is they've got some big expectations to continue to grow at a time when inflation around the world is starting to hit, but also at a time when China's starting to realise their environmental footprint a lot more and having to balance sort of pure economic growth with their environmental outcomes. There is, I just think, a little bit more tension. Realistically, after such, 30 odd years of such strong growth, you are always going to see a bit more moderation. The question, I think, for New Zealand becomes, okay, what is the next cab off the rank that we need to make sure that we're working with, especially at a time when geopolitically things are so much more risky. The interactions with China generally are certainly causing ructions in the economic and security world, but you look as well, where's New Zealand's interactions with the likes of India and other parts of Southeast Asia, and 50 years into the future, how are we connecting with Africa when they start to come forward? Yep, some nervousness there, if you will. Still a feeling that they're going to be a very, very important player, something to keep an eye on.
And I mean, China and our forestry market are obviously very closely linked with this, that industry having a really close reliance on the China market, and log prices are driven from that demand. What are you seeing there?
I mean, there has been a bit of weakness again in recent months, and a lot of that's just been because China has been locked down, a lot of it. The expectation is that things will bounce back the other way. So, now that you're seeing some of those major cities start to move forward again, which is exciting. We know that, again, those log prices are all right, all things considered. Certainly an expectation and a want for them to push higher. If the Chinese economy can start to re-go a bit faster, that'd be great news. The bigger question, I think, is just around their property development and similar. Everyone's just always been cautious about how they balance, the amount of investment they're putting in and the sort of high levels of stimulus versus, the likes of was it Evergrande last year and similar. So again, questions about it, but I think, again, the underlying tone is there's enough that's going on. New Zealand's still exporting and trading with China at very strong levels. We know that the interactions there remain upbeat. So a feeling that, look, a bit of softness at the start of 2022, something hopefully that we will grow even stronger into over the rest of the year.
And I suppose on the back of the sort of China side around the forestry market and things like that, we've got Russia going on as well. We know traditionally when sort of Russia comes in and brings into the market, it affects us quite drastically in New Zealand. How are you sort of seeing with Russia and the timber market and that sort of thing? And do you sort of see an opportunity for us to sort of pivot with countries like sort of India and Japan and stuff like that as well?
Yeah, I think there are, one, opportunities, and two, I think we just sort of have to look at those quite seriously, because we know that those, again, geopolitical ructions are coming through so much stronger this year than any other time. And really, I guess the challenge that we have is that this is not likely to be a short-term thing. It's not like, in a few months Russia, re-enters the international community and everyone's mates again. This is pretty long-term fundamental shifts. So, yeah, we should be looking elsewhere. And I think as well, New Zealand's got a good position being known as an open trader. Now, not specific on forestry, but we've been a little bit perturbed recently by some other parts of the world who have really started to push back on the idea of globalisation, looking way more at the protectionism sort of angle. Recently, I think Malaysia's banned some chicken exports. You've seen Indonesia's banned palm oil exports. Everyone's very much sort of going, no, we're going to do it ourselves. And I think that means that, one, where it's still an important player in the market, we can say to people, look, we're very happy to trade, we're very open, we're working with you, let's make this, go through. And then looking at other opportunities, going, hey, we're open for business, where is that opportunity that we can help you? You've obviously got some building you want to do, we've got some logs, let's make a deal. I think New Zealand is renowned for that, so it's a position we absolutely should play in, especially at a time when some of those traditional players, like say Russia, is out of favour, let's be real. But I think as well, there's a tension, right, of yes, they might be out of favour from a security point of view, but they might still have logs. And so there's a tension of, okay, well, how much wheeling and dealing can we do there? If New Zealand can present itself as, hey, I've got a real good option and also I'm not actually trying to fight a war, maybe I'm a better prospect. We're not as big, but I think, again, we can start to muscle in a little bit of margin there.
And I suppose carrying on with the sort of forestry side of things, we sort of briefly talked about the housing industry and that, obviously with international in China and their housing sort of challenges and that sort of thing that are going through. How do you sort of see the domestic wood market and opportunities here while we're going through those international areas? Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of promise there. I think that some of the loss of processing capacity we've had in New Zealand has just been a bit of a challenge now that we've found ourselves, over the last year or so, wanting to do a lot more with wood, and everyone's sort of gone, oh, well, that was might have looked like a bit of a mistake, or at least just a real challenge of actually getting things going. I think the bigger challenge probably for the domestic market is just all of the changes that are coming through from an environmental point of view. All of that's just making it, so much more difficult and more expensive to go forward. So, I think we've got to get some of those settings right. We know there's a lot more that we could be doing domestically. There's certainly a lot of operations there. The government's trying to work on that. I still get the feeling that we haven't quite figured out the right answer there. Everyone always says, well, we've got wood, why aren't we using it here? No one, I don't think we've been able to sort of put that convincing argument of what we need to be doing better here in New Zealand. So work in progress, but I think we're all in an all right position. We just sort of need to get all of those different things lined up.
And I suppose pivoting away from forestry and talking China again, and the other real key market for us is that dairy industry and the reliance there with China. What do you see happening in that space?
Look, I think things from a dairy point of view are still relatively upbeat. We know that the returns there are strong. In fact, at the moment they're super strong. We know as well, though, that costs are coming through for farmers. So, as high as the dairy price is, it's not just profit. That's the revenue line, if you will. Fertiliser prices up, 150%. So that's starting to bite. But you do still see some very upbeat demand from that. At the same time, I get the feeling that we could, again, be doing more, not only with China, but the rest of the world. US recently has had some real issues with trying to find infant formula. Surely that would have been the opportunity for New Zealand to go, look, we're really good friends. We've just been meeting in the White House. Should we can put some, bags of formula in our carry-on next time we come over if you want. So there's an ability, I think, to go more. The bigger question, I think, is how we sort of look at the likes of value versus just commodity and similar when it comes to dairy and a lot of other stuff. During COVID, commodity was the big focus, whole milk powder, and that has been driving things forward. But we know know that at previous points China's really loved New Zealand butter. I mean, I remember the muddy bun sort of phenomenon a few years back. So there's big opportunities there. Again, I think coming forward at a time when New Zealand is very much seen as that premium product. Dairy's given us a good in, but we know that our horticulture, our meats and similar are also doing better. So a good launch pad there into the Chinese market.
Yeah, I mean, we talked before, I suppose, about US and also with China, and at the moment, particularly, I suppose, New Zealand's walking a fine line between aligning with China and the US in the Pacific. Do you see any pushback from China if our government favours a closer relationship with the US, which they look like they're moving towards?
Yeah, I think there are big tensions there. New Zealand has always been told by everyone else in the world, you're going to have to choose at some point. And New Zealand's been pretty steadfast at saying, we don't want to. We think that we can operate, with that very, very clear intent that we are an independent international actor. Yep, we certainly have all these various arrangements, but we want to play it pretty much with a straight bat. And that's what we've been doing. And I think it sort of shows, right, that despite all of the sort of views that New Zealand might hold on different topics that might not be in line with the Chinese view and vice versa, we're still able to trade. We've still got a very good working relationship, but there is going to be further tensions coming forward. I think for New Zealand, it's also making it clear where our focus is when it comes to those security arrangements, understanding who our partners are, but also being realistic that, there are going to be some tensions, and really New Zealand's been quite good that when there are tensions, we've been able to work through them rather than sort of, just having a tantrum with China like you've seen with other countries. Big balance, but something that I think we actually do quite well, and I'm relatively confident about our ability to do it in the future.
Yeah, so we probably wouldn't go down the Australian line in terms of, I suppose, some of the tantrums, as you might say, with China that they've had over the last couple of years.
No, absolutely not. And let's be real, start of COVID-19, what Australia and New Zealand were saying we're fairly similar in terms of, hey, we should really get to the bottom of where this COVID-19 thing came from. It's just the way that we went about it was quite different. New Zealand was very much, okay, let's figure it out. Let's start with a clean slate. Let's go from there. Australia was a lot more, hey, China, you know how you let COVID out? What was that about, guys? It just didn't gel. And again, I think New Zealand's got to, recognise, and we do, that we're a lot smaller. Australia is a much larger economy, much stronger, much closer security ties with the US. We don't operate in that sort of sphere, so I think we do need to be looking at it from a much different model. As well as that, though, I think it's important, when we do have all these other big challenges out there in the world, China and Russia, have previous alignment on various issues. It's the sort of thing I think New Zealand's got a big place to play there in terms of communicating and putting, reasonable diplomatic pressure on China about the views that we hold, sort of almost as the good cop, bad cop, if you will, because we've got a huge place to play there. China does respect us. I mean, they wouldn't be having the interactions they have with us if they didn't, because we're too small. Like, on the scale of things, the team of 5 million is great, but it doesn't have any encounter to the team of 7 billion globally, So I think we do sort of hold our own in those international areas.
So we sort of talked before about some of the challenges around supply issues, but the other one that we did mention was labour. So, we've got an issue that we see around recruiting qualified heavy diesel techs and that sort of thing. So what are some of the indicators you see around sort of the brain drain and skills shortages for New Zealand with post-COVID borders opening, and sort of what's some of the ways that we could potentially look at helping and protecting ourselves, I suppose, with losing people too much?
They're not good for the moment. I mean, the indicators are fairly grim. For the first time since, the triple whammy of the global financial crisis, the Christchurch earthquakes, and the Australian mining boom, you've got a net outflow of New Zealanders. I mean, that's big news. We've lost, I think, the total number of 20 to 29-year-olds in New Zealand at the moment is 3% lower than what it was a year before. So that talent is exiting. Now, in the very short term, there's not a huge amount that we can do. 40,000 New Zealanders should have left New Zealand over the last 2 years if they were going out like normal. They didn't, because Fortress New Zealand was a great place to hunker down. Now they're very much making up for lost time at a time when we also know that with New Zealand reopening a bit slower than the rest of the world, we're not first cab off the rank for bringing in new talent, and we know that those visa processing times are going to take a while. So it looks pretty disruptive for the next year. Now, look, in general, we're a bit more pessimistic about how quickly things come back, but I think there is an opportunity for New Zealand to actually sort of stake its case here, to go, look, let's work quite hard on these immigration processing elements. Let's get things to be as streamlined and as quick and easy as possible. That's going to be important. Let's also ensure that when we are looking out to the world, we're sort of offering a good opportunity here. We've got exciting jobs. We're seen as a good place to stick around. And look, if anything like COVID ever comes back again, don't you want to be in the place that weathered it so well the first time? And the big one as well is that I think we need, once that that sort of backlog, if you will, of exiters go through, you want to be able to sort of say, okay, well, let's figure out, one, how we stop even further numbers of people leaving, but also what's the attraction back for Kiwis that we've lost, because we know there are some exciting opportunities. Realistically, and I think we've got to be pretty blunt here, New Zealand's currently offering young people higher inflation, some of the highest house prices in the world, and wages that just aren't quite as comparable. So there's a push over time that I think we need to get right. We are, though, on the right path, and I think that's encouraging, right? We're doing more skills training and similar. We are, increasing the pay that people are getting. We're also becoming more innovative, partly because you have to in a pandemic. So there's the right sort of settings. It is going to take a while, but certainly I think for the next year, a bit more of a challenge. Then New Zealand's got an ability to sort of make or break its own destiny.
And with our borders opening and overseas tourists returning, which is a positive, what are the expectations from your perspective in terms of getting back to anywhere near pre-COVID levels for New Zealand Inc? And obviously there's a flow-on effect for key industries associated with tourism with that.
Yeah, I think, look, it is going to be a bit of a slow burn from a supply and a demand point of view. The planes just aren't all flying. We've got to get pilots requalified, new air crews ready and similar. But we're also seeing that demand's a little bit sluggish. That's going to be quite dependent on where we're talking about. Now, we talked a lot about China before. They were a big, important market. They're not going to come back as quick. They've only just, ended their lockdown. So that'll be an exciting boost when it comes forward, but just a little bit slower to get going. Australia's obviously there and moving ahead, although they're a little bit of a substitute for New Zealanders, if you will. Europe, a little bit softer in a sense, just with that sort of war stuff coming forward, very high inflation around energy prices. The exciting one for me is the US market. They've done very well. We know that actually even a few months back, the number of passengers travelling between the US and Mexico was above pre-pandemic levels when it came to air travel. So they're getting out and about. They've got some cash. Remember, they got stimulus checks quite a few times. So, it's sort of time to say, well, cash one over here, please. So there's a good ability, I think, to draw that in. What I think it does suggest, though, is that New Zealand would be foolish to pivot, heavily immediately back towards international and sort of go, okay, domestic sort of held its own and helped to get us through, but now we're going to switch. I think realistically there's going to be a much greater balance there. And so a big tension there for some providers over how do you focus on that? It used to be that you were fully internationally both focused. Now you're focused way more on domestic. I think there's just sort of a feeling of, okay, how do we get an offering here that meets both parties? Because ignoring domestics, I think, would be a foolish idea, but, not recognising the opportunities that inbound internationals provide, also foolish. So a good medium there is going to be a slower burn, but I think also a time for New Zealand to reset what we offer, because there was a lot of talk about wanting to have much more sustainable tourism, but that is going to come. There's a bit of a transition cost there, but probably leaves us in a better long-term position.
And what about those key industries that are closely associated? Would you see a flow-on effect for some of them?
Yeah, I think you would. And I mean, we've already seen a number of those areas, both very directly and indirectly coming through, who haven't been doing as well through the pandemic. The likes of hospitality and retail, obviously very hard hit. In saying that, though, we're seeing that some parts of the country, they're doing actually quite a bit better. They're now bringing in more money from people who are working from home and similar. So it's not a universal truth. I think what we're also seeing is, let's look at construction. Of course, people who might have been building hotels. Well, probably not as much of that going forward. What I think you will see a bit more of is some of the renovations, particularly around MIQ, who they've been operating in a certain way. Now they need quite a bit of a refresh. But also people who are going. We talked about capacity before. There's some still very big and strong pipelines in other areas that I think people will be able to redeploy their workforces into. So a shift possibly in what they've been previously doing. The big one, I guess, remains around transport and what that. When we talk transport here, we're talking again air crew, flight attendants, and also those who might have been doing tours and similar. They're probably just really not going to be at the same level that they previously were. But we know with such a low unemployment rate, there's an opportunity for them to pivot into new roles. Perhaps they can become a diesel engineer. Again, not quick, but I think what's exciting now is New Zealand's getting a better education system at that sort of tertiary level to give people that opportunity to shift. So where there are disruptions, I think realistically there is some ability to move and pivot, which is exciting.
And I suppose when we are talking about moving and rejigging and that sort of thing, so New Zealand does need to sort of rejig its economy to more than just based on commodities and tourism and stuff like that. So what would be the best sort of approach in your mind for how we can kickstart that and get that rolling?
I mean, some of it's coming through with necessity, right? Those supply chain disruptions realistically look like they're not going to solve themselves very quickly. And a lot of businesses are then saying, okay, well, I need to shore up my own local supply chain. Let's look at, taking effectively the New Zealand DIY approach. If I can't get something in on a ship, well, maybe I'll build it here. The amount of factories that are starting to come up around the country are quite exciting. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think we're going to start building cars again like we did back in the 80s and what have you. But we are starting to see a lot of quite niche manufacturing coming forward, which is exciting. People are doing a lot more of that. At the same time, we're seeing a lot more storage sort of in warehousing spaces, people wanting to order a bit more, so just in time, is very much broken, so holding a bit more carrying stock. All of that is naturally coming forward. The big one, I think, going for the future, we know there's some good infrastructure capital plans. That's obviously going to add to it. I think we've got to get our education right. The fact that we've got people that are leaving the New Zealand education system who just can't do simple maths is a challenging one. I mean, we talked about a diesel mechanic. If you can't do some of that basic maths, it's hard, right? You've just got a much smaller pool of people that are going to be into those sort of areas. Look, I'm not saying that we need everyone to be able to do, advanced calculus. It's the maths that you can use, if you will. So there's an opportunity there, I think, to really work that out. We're doing better in the tertiary education space. Great. Not doing quite as well, in my opinion, in the primary and secondary space. So much more money into there because, man, if you can set a kid up well to start with, you're on a much better place. If you don't, then you're just sort of starting so far much further behind the eight ball. So an opportunity there. The other big bit, I guess, is how we encourage some of that investment. We talk a lot about R&D in the country. I think we sort of need to move away from that R&D, especially the R part of that, or expand the definition. A lot of businesses across the country are often focusing on trying to develop their opportunities and thinking about the sort of additional investments that they can make. But because it doesn't fit squarely in that R&D category and it's not seen as academic research almost, well, no one applies. It's just too difficult. So I think sort of going, okay, how do we encourage businesses, support them to invest more? We know we can get more capitally intensive. At the same time, you don't want the government to just throw a whole bunch of money out there that means you've got a whole lot of winners but also a whole lot of losers. So some sort of scheme there to get a little bit more money into businesses so they can sort of supercharge their own future. I think that holds real promise.
And I suppose the other side of that as well is the energy market and that sort of thing with all the sort of change and growth. You talk about storage and new factories and stuff like that. The energy consumption is an area that's going to change and grow. So where do you see energy consumption growing? I suppose oil and gas, we've seen a big cutback in that sort of area. And then obviously we talked about solar farms and stuff like that, probably, so, renewable sources. Yep. Where do you saw that whole energy sector heading? I
think there's a huge amount more that's coming down the pipeline with it. And I mean, it's funny, right? I remember starting one of my roles back in sort of the period after the global financial crisis. There were a whole lot of energy projects that were all very much culled very quickly because demand and consumption, didn't fall off a cliff per se, but sort of, stagnated quite heavily. You've seen a few intervening years where people have had ideas, maybe will we, won't we. Now it's very much, oh gosh, if I've got any sort of idea for a new production generation asset, well, it's starting to come online. I mean, you look at Tauhara 2, for example, coming through up in Taupō, that's exciting, new generation in the geothermal space. But I mean, the number of wind farms and especially the solar stuff that's coming forward at the moment, quite big. The big question, I think, comes, we know there's actually a huge amount of additional consumption that will come online because of all of these different industrial processes that we're seeing, in terms of people doing the likes of, changing process heat and similar. So we've got to find a way to work that one out. We're also, like you said, warehousing, the likes of, just manufacturing in general requires all of that additional energy. And if we are going to be moving towards EVs and similar, well, that puts a big additional amount of demand onto the grid. So there's work to be done there. I guess where I see it going, apart from those areas we've talked about, solar and what have you, there's still a lot of talk about, the likes of hydro and similar. Doesn't seem like we've got a huge number of projects that are just waiting in the wings there. We've done a lot of that, particularly in the South Island. The one I do wonder about is the likes of hydrogen rather than hydro, coming through Taranaki and Southland with some exciting opportunities. And again, the sort of development that breeds. Everyone's talking about data centres now. I mean, those, one, use a huge amount of energy, but wow, that's exciting, in terms of a new development option for New Zealand. Data sovereignty, I mean, there's sort of social outcomes that come through there, but just some pure economic, hard outcomes there that are quite exciting. So big opportunity there. Seems like the technology is still a little way away, but the fact that we're actually sort of gunning for it now, I think, was quite exciting.
Yeah, definitely the data center side of things is an area we see with power gen and things like that. So it's a huge, exciting space, but it's coming through more and more and more as well. So
I guess the difficulty, right, is how to keep up with it at a point where it's sort of gone from zero to hero so quickly, on top of a huge amount of other work to be done. And it's sort of how do you plan for that when it is coming forward so quickly? And that, I guess, is the nimbleness that New Zealand provides. So we are able to refocus that, and the fact that there have been so many being announced or being scoped out, and Auckland, Southland, just about anywhere in your backyard is now a potential data centre site. That is exciting for us. I mean, and it's I guess we talk a lot about challenges and opportunities. That's going to be a challenge to resource, but man, it's one of the more exciting challenges that we often face.
And do you think that is a sort of a result of the number 8 why mentality that we have in terms of being nimble around being effective in terms of doing that stuff?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's also sort of highlights the investments that we've made. The fact that we've got ultra-fast broadband, that we have made sure that we've got various, data cable connections coming across the ocean. I mean, that's been important not only for data centres generally, but you look at, how would we have worked from home during COVID-19 without some of those investments? And you look at the Aussies again, without fibre, that really hurt them and set them back. So I think, it's that thinking of, well, we have been developing, obviously something like UFB was put forward quite early in the piece and made sure that we were pre-positioned. My big question now, we're looking at data centres and similar. For New Zealand, what is the next UFB opportunity that we've sort of got to hit before we need it, rather than sort of after we've realised it would have been good to have?
Yeah, certainly a very good point, and great to hear about potential opportunities moving forward. Now, I suppose moving away from the economic side of things, on a personal level, your role must give you some great opportunities out there. What are some of the standout moments or highlights for you from a professional perspective?
I think the best one almost each and every day at the moment is getting out there, into the regions, out across the country, getting away from the ivory tower of the Wellington office. Now, office is fantastic, it's very much a home away from home, but getting out there, gives you a much better appreciation. We're looking at numbers and statistics and that all day. Excel spreadsheets are our best friends, but you get no better feeling for how something's going than getting out there on the ground and seeing it. And so I think that's been quite exciting to be able to do over the last few months. You pick up some of those difficulties that people are having and sometimes can suggest some opportunities that are coming forward, but also sort of looking and trying to interconnect all of those differences, because a lot of the times, particularly in local areas, everyone's so busy that they are very much, all hands to the pump. They're looking very inwardly because they've got a lot of work to do. That opportunity to understand what's happening in their business, so that gives us better economic information, but also to sort of, let them pop their heads up for a moment and think about that wider picture is incredibly exciting. I mean, the fact that last year I made it to all 67 local authorities across the country, including the Chathams, was fantastic. I'm trying to do the same sort of thing this year. So it's really cool to be able to see your own backyard.
Yeah, most definitely.
And so it sounds like, travelling around and stuff like that, it's pretty full on, and with your role is very full on. You're in the media spotlight and things like that. So what do you do in your downtime? How do you unwind?
Downtime, what's that?
I was going to say, do you have any downtime?
Not a huge amount, to be honest. But I think that's because I do fill a lot of my uneconomic time, if you will, with a whole lot of other sort of community pursuits and so on. I'm New Zealand's youngest Justice of the Peace, and volunteer in a number of other sort of roles, again, where I have the spare capacity, and that keeps me going, I guess. I've always been quite keen to make sure that I try and leave this place better off than I found it, and I'll do that in as many different ways as possible. But again, I thrive off that sort of ability to get out and about, so I'll be doing that, for work trips, but also for, other things, go and hang out with friends in Auckland or whatever it might be. But it's just good to sort of be able to live amongst it, rather than sort of, observe from afar or from theoretical point of view. Being practical on the ground, seeing things as I go is huge. But look, I'm not going to lie, the downtime is fairly limited. I should be getting probably a lot more sleep, but I also sort of see it at the moment that there's so much work going on, so much activity, that I'd like to try and keep up with as much of it as I can.
Yeah, and I suppose that's one of the, we had the opportunity to get you in here, and there's just so much going on that, our customers and in our different industries are keen to sort of know what's happening, and a really good opportunity, to have you here and explain some of those things, hopefully in some layman's terms and and making sense at the end of the day. And sounds like there's certainly a lot of opportunity out there, that's for sure.
Oh, a huge amount. And again, the fact that New Zealand finds itself in such a good starting position means that we can launch from that. We know that we've got the opportunities. We know that we're sort of in that perfect Goldilocks zone of not having too much scale that sort of stops us and restricts our inertia, but we've also got enough energy, we've got enough resources to actually keep things going. We can sort of try things and pivot away. And the fact as well that we sort of maintain this, the strong position that we do in the world. People look to us and are very willing to engage. That's hugely exciting. We've made some good plans for the future. Now we need to execute on them.
I suppose the final question for you, you've achieved a lot at a relatively young age. That gets talked about quite a lot. But what goals do you, I suppose, have professionally over the next, couple of years?
Oh, honestly, I've no idea. I mean, I'd like to sleep a bit more at some point in the next few months, but that's probably as much as I've got on the plate. And I think realistically, I mean, I never really had a goal when I came into this either. The overarching one is try and, again, leave this place off better than I found it, and I'll do that in whatever way I can best do. Now, I found out that for some reason, economists are generally pretty boring, and maybe I can make it a little bit more fun, a little bit more understandable. We know that people make better decisions if they've got more information. If I can help communicate that out, that's a good thing from my point of view. Going forward, I think, that ability not only to answer questions, but also sort of influence, big decision makers and key companies, government ministers, departments, local councils, all those sort of organisations, civic society in general, I think is important because, again, not only is there information that we can put forward, but it's also, what are the areas that maybe people aren't thinking about that we are seeing in our numbers, are seeing in our analysis that need to be addressed. We know that there are some big issues that New Zealand sort of continues to kick the can down the road on. We know we will need to address them in future years. My big overarching goal, very much like I said though, is to try and do things better. And I feel like I'm giving it a good fist at the moment. But also I think that tension, right, of we know that everyone needs a break at some point, and so maybe I'll try and get my leave balance down at some point.
Well, this brings us to the end of our time today. So thanks, Brad, for coming on Breaking Ground. It's been great having a chat with you and stuff like that, and some really good insights as well into where we're heading.
Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you so much to our listeners as well. We hope you've enjoyed today's conversation. Yeah, certainly been really insightful. So as always, we'd love your feedback. To get in touch, you can send us a message on our TerraCat social media channels. And please keep an eye on our TerraCat Facebook page for details about next month's episode of Breaking Ground. Thanks a lot.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.